Hi everyone, it's Nicola Burton from Music Means Business with today's The Music Reel. I have with me today, obviously, Manny, Mark and Michael from the Pushworth Group. And we have, hi guys, how are you? We have a very familiar face with us today. We have Mr. Greg Dodge. Now, he's a well-known Queensland icon of the music industry. As part of the Brisbane Music Retailers Association, he actually co-founded Q Music and spent many years as the first president of Q Music. And anyone out there right now who's currently studying music, you'd be interested to know that it was Greg who actually convinced the state government to build and invest in the first TAFE College in Australia, specifically to train popular music industry people. So that's a huge accolade for Greg. And he's seen so much change in the music industry, particularly in Queensland over the past 4 decades. There would not be many music artists in Queensland who have not been mentored by him. And he's one of those people in our industry who knows everybody and he understands the power of influence. And he's famous for bringing so many people together for the variety of social, recreational and development music programs that he's co-created over the last 4 decades with the local, state and the national governments. And for the past couple of years, Greg has been active in intercultural youth development around hip hop and film. Greg, that's quite an introduction. It's so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you. Really, really well. Really well. Thank you.
That is great. How have you coped in lockdown?
Well, we've painted the house inside and out.
Right. Okay.
We've spent the last 4 weeks. We thought, well, why not? You know, we've got nothing better to do. We've done the gardens, we've done the house. What else can you do? But I've been planning stuff as well.
Great. Well, I know the boys have got some questions for you, so I'm going to start with Mark.
Yeah. All right. As a long-time music retailer, you would have seen some massive comprehensive changes. Last week, we were chatting with one of our suppliers, Stewie from Gold Coast Music, and his business, he said, been literally booming ever since the whole lockdown scenario kicked in. From that perspective, what do you think the future holds for the music industry post-COVID-19?
I think history shows us that every time there's a depression or a recession, music, for some reason, always comes to the fore. It's been already tracked that happens every time. And the funny thing is, I spoke to the editor of the Australian Musician magazine, a guy called Greg Phillips, who's been around for years. Greg's in Sydney or Melbourne, sorry. And I said to him, how's the industry going? And this is only a couple of weeks ago. He said, look, the funny part is, he said, everyone's reporting cracker Christmas type business. Now, I'm no longer a retailer. Like, I was a retailer for probably 20 years, you know, with my own business, managing Ellaways and Parlings before they were brushes. So, you know, I'd been in the industry a lot of time and I've seen an immense amount of disasters, including my own. But then, you know, Australian Academy of Music, which was one of the largest music stores in Australia that operated here at Spring Hill, you know, it was a family business with Johnny Morris, who did so much for the town with his, you know, with his Love Him or Not. It was the Academy Rock Awards. Yeah. And then they went into high school rock. But they did an amazing amount of business. 1999 came along and they were completely wiped out. Now, they stayed for another 5 years because a supplier who he owed money to basically took over the business. And 5 years later, he made all his money back, that guy, by selling the building. But in that 5 years, Academy sort of weaned down and eventually fell over completely. And then Billy Hydes, who was a stable force across Australia, had built a mega business, swallowed up Allen's and Billy Hydes all into one big conglomerate. In 2010, crash. They hit the wall as well. So the industry was going through incredibly bad times. Now, the sense I'm getting, there's a lot of change. You know, look, there used to be 7 or 8 music shops in Brisbane alone. I remember in Rockhampton, not that long ago, probably about 98, there were 7 music product shops in Rockhampton alone. Think about that. Toowoomba had 7 music shops. You know, now you'd find 1 if you're lucky. And even Brisbane, I can count probably 4, maybe 5 tops, you know.
Yeah.
So not all of them are doing wonderful, but some are absolutely blowing the world apart right now.
Isn't that great? Because when you guys are buying your PA and your instruments, you're not really thinking, you're not really conscious of what's it like on the other side of the counter. And without our music shops and our music retailers, like it's going to be really hard. You can get it online, but isn't it great, Michael, when you go to the store and you can actually talk to them and get some real-time information about, what's available, what's coming up. You as a muso, you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, my favourite pastime when I was still to this day, but I remember Greg mentioning about Haley back in the day. When it was like downstairs at Queen Street Mall, every Friday night, me and my mates would jump on the bus and we'd go and with our dirty little hands touch every single guitar that we ever dreamed of.
Yeah.
And those sort of things, having that face to face with all those guys, and a lot of those guys that still work there are still in other music shops and still in sort of contact with them today, and got to know all these guys. So yeah, I think it's that part of the industry is really important.
It is.
Greg,
Yes.
From me, with all this that we're going through at the moment, do you see many opportunities coming up through government programs once this all sort of back to normal?
So I'm not big on what government do. I was just sort of working my way back in. So I'm just for the listeners, I've been out of the industry for probably about 5 or 6 years, if you call it that. I did a 2-year youth program down in Logan with 120 Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, Polynesian kids. So that was sort of my way back in. But I was looking up at Brisbane, trying to get my head around what grants are around and what's around. I know right now there are little chunks of money available called booster packs. So if someone wants to collaborate with another artist right now while you're in lockdown, you can do it digitally, and you can apply for $500 up to $1,000 as long as you've got some end result out of that. And that's to really get creators to collaborate online, to meet other people they wouldn't normally do it. So that's available now. I know through BMAC, and I don't know if anyone knows what BMAC is. It used to be the Brisbane Ethnic Music Arts Centre. I think that's what it used to stand for.
Yeah.
It operates under the Story Bridge, but BMAC's run by a guy called Evan Alexander. Now, Ant McKenna is another guy that works with him, and he approached me a couple of weeks ago and said, just let everyone know there's these booster packs. So I've been letting my little community know if they want to start creating, you can get money. That's just access to stuff. There's little grants now, lots of them being sort of pumped out there. There's things called the RASN funding. If you're outside of Brisbane, there's all these different ones that the local councils run. So you can actually access them, and some of them can be up to like 3 to 5, maybe even 10 grand.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm only getting my head around it now because I've never really been one to chase the grant money. But, last year I was watching a lot of artists, what are they doing? And there was a lady who had got $30,000 to record an album out of Mackay, and that covers all the marketing and so on. And I thought, wow, that wasn't heard of even in my day, 10, 20 years ago, not a chance. So I think there's so many opportunities, and you can find those doorways. They are out there.
Yeah, right. Well, we'll be putting some links in this post so that everyone can actually explore the opportunities that Greg's talking about. Manny.
Hi, Greg. How are you faring, mate? You're looking pretty healthy, and it's good to see you haven't changed over the years, mate. Likewise, I guess I'm curious. Q Music. I guess we were all complicit in the very early days as musicians in that era. We were all part of that Queensland Music Awards, and I enjoyed performing as part of that. But it was interesting because in the very early days of Q Music, was actually driven by musical retailers. And I remember yourself and obviously, Mick Privatero, who's still with Australian Concert Productions, stalwarts of the music industry. Yeah, Barry Bull, absolutely. Some great names of, the Queensland past. But it's very interesting to see the transition it came out of music, essentially music retail, because you were the business minds of the industry per se. Don't get me wrong, we understood that you guys had to do what you needed to do to maintain, you know, a presence in there because it was retail, it was commercially driven. However, the transition of Q Music, we've been with Q Music now, whether we've been active or not active, we've been with Q Music now, members, I'd say for the better part of nearly 30, would need to be close to 33 years for me now. So it's been interesting to see the transition to come out of music retail, where it was then, and it was essentially looked after by the musical retailers under the auspices of, you know, commerciality. Now it's this massive government-funded organisation, which is still includes music retail, but it's now driven by, I guess, the music, more so the music enterprise rather than the retail enterprise. I'd be very curious from your point of view, now over the series of 35 or 40 years that it's existed, that change, how you view that change.
Yeah, good question. So historically what happened, for everyone that doesn't know, that Brisbane and Queensland in particular had been a thriving touring scene. And I had come up to Queensland in a touring band in the late 70s on what they called the circuits, you know, and those circuits, the Ivan Damon circuits, you know, I was only a kid. I was probably, I don't know, whatever I was, 18, 19. The thing is, what happened through the 80s, there was a shift that was going on sort of nationally. And that shift was people started to lobby the federal government from a contemporary music industry, saying, look, we're legitimate, we're an industry, and we've got bands like INXS, and we've got bands like AC/DC overseas, and yet we don't have any training for the crew, for the management, for any infrastructure. So we've got these industries that can create, well, you know, millions and millions of dollars and jobs and revenue, but we've got no infrastructure. And there was a guy in 1987 who somehow managed to convince the Labor government, I think at the time, to develop an organisation called the Australian Music Development Corporation. Its brand was Oz Music. So you remember that? Yeah. 1987, that came out. Now that's what got me excited, because they were talking the same language as I had been talking about. We need to create music in Queensland. We've got to do more original music. You know, we've got to get away from being covers only. Now, I'm not down on covers, because you need the blend of both. I mean, good musicians have to learn their craft from developing covers, and then they move in. And you know, the fact that you guys particularly been around 30 odd years, we've seen the evolution of this reality in Brisbane. Whereas Melbourne had entrepreneurs in the 70s who were really pushing the record industry, you know, promoting new music. And so Melbourne became a very cluster of indie record labels. They weren't controlled by the multinationals. Sydney tended to be the corporate capital of copyright. You know, so the Sonys, the Polygramms and the Warners all hubbed in Sydney. And interesting, around 89, there were no really strong recorded acts coming out of Sydney to a large degree, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But out of Melbourne, you had Gadinsky with Mushroom with like 72 top acts on his label. So he became the CEO of Oz Music, Michael Gadinsky. And this guy called Pete Stevens started this Oz Music with the intention to set up official training programs that could go into the schools and could start doing certificate-based training around TAFE College. And that got me involved in a thing called the Industry and Training Advisory Board, where we lobbied government for almost 3 years solid. Now, at that time, you're right about the retailers. The retailers were the only ones in this town who really had, let's say, the resources. There weren't record companies doing amazing amount of work, getting a lot of royalties back. Our industry at that late 80s in Brisbane had 32 studios, all under the banner of the Queensland Recording Association, a QRA. Yep. And they actually used to run every year a pat on the back celebration called the Sunny Awards.
Sunny Awards,
yeah. You remember that?
Okay. Yep. Now the Sunny Awards, the Sunny Awards would pat themselves on the back for writing the best jingle. And, you know, most of them were doing jingles and making money out of jingles. There were the odd recording studios, like there was Sunshine Studios with Leon Prescott, and, you know, there was the boys up on Paddington, can't even remember the name, Sweet 16. There were some pretty cool studios around, and there was a lot of underground stuff. You've got to remember, 89, Triple Z was still huge, but a lot of those bands weren't going anywhere. But there was a lot of community buzz. And I think I plugged into that zeitgeist. I started my own music shop in 1989 after managing Music Junction up at Paddington. Music Junction at Paddington gave me a deep insight into the psyche of the Brisbane original music scene. You know, the passion of the Dream Killers and all these sort of hardcore bands that were doing stuff, Pangaea. And we got excited because we said, shit, you know, there's some really good music, but it's not going anywhere. Yeah. And I can remember the young band Powderfinger at the time, you know, he just got out of school and they bought their first Marshall head, and Dad came in and bought it for them, and they had this young band, and, you know, they're all pretty switched on young guys. And it was funny because at that time, really original music couldn't even get any work. You know, no one was interested in it. You know, as you guys know, the venues weren't interested. No Brisbane band had any credibility. Even up to 1992, Wickety Whack had been the most successful touring band out of Queensland. Yeah. And there was a marker for me. It was 1992. They went to the Boondall Entertainment Centre and booked it, sold out shows, 3 shows back to back. And I just went, holy moly. But it was a turning point. Yeah, it was a show band. It was the last of the show bands, 1992. But it was the start of some movement. And it was, Q Music wasn't even conceived. What happened, we had this retailers body called the Music Industry Association of Queensland. And we were working with Oz Music, which was the federal body. And there were people in South Australia and even Western Australia trying to say, and Victoria, they had a thing down there called Victoria Rock. And Victoria Rock got $1 million grant. Now that sounds a lot of money, right? But I'll explain something. They got $1 million grant to develop programs and stuff in Melbourne at the time and Victoria. Oz Music got $2 million to set up there federally every year. Now, compare this to the orchestras in each state were being funded to the tune of $5 million to $7 million each at that time. So can you imagine how our industry was saying, well, hang on, you're playing dead white man's music and we're trying to create a new industry pathways that have got global repercussions with intellectual property. And I think it was the fact that a lot of the people really couldn't understand, and I'm talking about the people in the control of the money chains, couldn't understand that intellectual property was actually the difference between a contemporary music and dead man white man music, where the copyright had already run out because 75 years after the death of the author, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, that was what we really got hooked on. So Q Music was born out of the bum of the learning experience that Music Industry Association of Queensland, or the MIAQ, which was a whole bunch of retailers. We got rid of Mick Privatera and Johnny Morris and Barry Bull. I was the only remaining retailer. Jacinta Brongeest, who had been with Oz Music, her and I, and another group of people. So there was a little team of people that were sort of around us, and we lobbied the government, and they said, we'll give you 40 grand. Mind you, it wasn't easy. I must have spent literally a year in meetings, and that cost me dearly. I'm trying to run a brand new business. I started in 89. I'd already suffered by buying my partner out 2 years later. But I was so passionate about this idea of having a peak organisation that represented, by the way, covers and originals. Yeah. Q Music's intention in the beginning was that it represented all new and contemporary music, all popular music. Didn't matter how it was going to be, whether it was you're playing someone else's music or whether you were doing your own. You know, and most bands at the time were doing a mix of both.
Yep, as they
because they knew, because you need to have that cash flow. Yes, I mean, you need to have that. You're not going to get it in the first days. But anyway, over that 90s, there were so many acts that started to really prosper. But for me, I didn't see it really happen until about 98, 99. And the first one, as we all know, was Savage Garden for me, that really got away. And because we all knew them in their early days and how they came up through it, they were, even though Daniel Jones never went to South Bank TAFE, which started in 92, the first Queensland Contemporary Music College, the first one at the time. Today, there is 10 universities and colleges teaching contemporary music, right? Which to me is just an overkill.
Yeah.
But doesn't that tell you something about a whole nother set of issues that I can discuss later? But the TAFE College, in the first intake, there were only 30 students. Of those 30 students, most of them I'm still in touch with, believe it or not. How bizarre.
Wow.
Now, most of those students went on to incredible stuff. One went and set up a studio in Melbourne for 15 years called the Wick Studio. Glenn Scott, his name is. He lives up in Noosa now. You know, he went through a bit of a up and a down, but he's an amazing producer. But one guy in there was called Oliver Jones. Oliver Jones was the brother of Daniel Jones, and they had a band at that time, and the band had Daniel on keys. But I can remember Oliver, because we were running workshops around that time with John Kenny, a thing called 100% Juice. And in that, we used to say, if you really, really want to be successful, write songs, get good at learning how to write songs. It's an art form. It's different to being a musician. And then that's when I realized you can be a performer is different to being a musician, and a musician's different to being a songwriter. You know, an artist is different to someone can be all of those, but that's actually quite hard to do. To be all those three things, you know.
Yeah.
But that's what we were trying to train people through the 90s. And we started in schools. But Oz Music lost all its funding by 93. And that's why we started Q Music.
Perfect. Wow. So you guys, as you can hear, so much has gone into the establishment of this industry, of this market, by people like Greg for the last 4 decades. And there's so much to know about it. He's actually, you're writing a book, aren't you? You're writing a book about it.
I've written 18 chapters on my blog.
Yeah. I would like to include a link to that blog, because if you ever want to understand about being a live music artist in Queensland, that blog will give you just an incredible background. As you've heard Greg speak, Greg, we could probably talk to you for about 5 hours about this. We will have to wrap it up there. But like, that was really interesting to understand the background to all of the, I guess, the infrastructure that's been put in place to our music business ecosystem in Queensland. And Greg has been instrumental in that. So, wow, Greg, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you.
No, thank you, guys.
Wow.
No, that's really good.
And
to fast forward to now, I can see a great opportunity for the industry to reorganise itself, because I think the biggest thing at the moment is that there needs to be new business models.
Yes.
And I think I've come back to help experiment with that and explore that. I joined the Association of Artist Managements, which is a body of about 220 managers, just to have a look at an inside from the outside, if you know what I mean. So see what their chatter was. You know, look, it's a whole bunch of people that have a network. It's great. But I didn't see any new business models, and there's still no real talk of what those business models look like. I'm really interested in finding people that want to look at not only new business models from the management and, you know, the recording industry itself, but also from the artists, how to bring them together to collaborate across, for me, it's across culture. You know, we had a huge movement in the Indigenous music scene, you know, back in those days with Yothu Yindi and so on. But I think I could see a future where Indigenous artists should be performing with Indian or Asian or white Australian or whatever that's called. But we need to show what we are in Australia, because our uniqueness is that story we have of a culture that's over 65,000 years, and all of us that have come here on boats or planes.
Yep.
You know,
That's true.
That's it. And that's the story. And Australia has a great lot of lyrics that can go with that. You know, we had Men at Work with their famous Down Under one. But I think that people need to be inspired to pick that mantle up and run with it. That's just my view.
Well, look, you've got a project coming together that's called Coming Together.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
So we'll be talking about that. We'll probably catch up with you, I think, in another couple of weeks to talk about that, because I think I'd like to spend some time on that so that everyone who's watching this can actually understand how to be a part of these programs and these projects, because there's more. It's not just going out and playing at gigs. There's so much more to the industry that Greg is actually a part of. So we will be actually having conversations about that as we move through the weeks coming. But Greg, thank you so much again. It was lovely.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck. And I'll leave you guys until next time. Take care. And
See you,
this
Greg.
is Music Real.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you,
Greg.
Manny.
Appreciate it.
Catch you guys.
Bye.